in a way where you actually hurt yourself and hurt those you're trying to love. I'm trying to please everyone, trying to do everything perfect. Like we talked about last time, the false self.
Pride is a form of compensating for shame. We kind of lack the ability to zoom out and to see the whole picture because we're just in it.
Right.
Sin may look different, but doesn't mean that it doesn't have the same root with the fact that my environment isn't safe.
Hey, beautiful people, I'm Tina Morales.
And I'm Kiera Johnson.
And welcome to the Stories That Shape Us podcast, where we dive deep into the stories that have shaped who we are and who we're becoming.
We are so thrilled to have you join us. We are here to engage openly in hard conversations around faith, identity, relationships, and so much more.
Yes, if you want to peek into the journeys of healing and becoming, then we invite you to listen in on the conversation and leave transformed. Get ready for thought-provoking conversation, a whole lot of heart, and join us on this journey through the stories that shape us.
I just sat here like this.
And I like hear it.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Today we are, we've actually done a good amount of like pre-work for this one. I'm excited. But we're talking about why do we overcompensate?
Yes. I think it's so interesting, that question, because I'm still reading the book that we've been talking about, Emotionally Healthy Spirituality.
Go get it.
Emotionally unhealthy spirituality.
No, emotionally healthy.
Emotionally healthy, spirituality.
Yeah. That's what we want.
That's what we want to be, right? And this time of the year, you know, it's holidays, lots of relationship dynamics, family dynamics. Yeah. And I was just thinking more about that and the different things that we as people just doing life during these times experience. And I was thinking how it's chapter 3, he goes into just family dynamics and knowing the history of your family and trends within your family. And what's so neat about that is sometimes when you're not aware of those things, like you overcompensate. And I think that's so fascinating. I know I've done it in my own life. And so I was just talking to Tina, I was like, it'd be awesome to talk about this and how to repair and heal and do things better as you create your own family and do your own relationships going forward, but without overcorrecting or overcompensating in a way where you actually hurt yourself and hurt those you're trying to love. So I think it's just so fascinating during this time of the year where we're going to see everybody how to do so without causing any other pain, right? But being able to forge a new direction.
Yes. Oh my gosh.
In a healthy way.
Yeah. I love it. I love it too, because so what we were talking about, right? Like overcompensating is a thing that we do, right?
Yeah,
it's something that we can engage in. But it's also like whenever we do something, it's typically in response to something, right? So I like to just call it, it's a way that we either cope, it's a way that we're responding to something, whatever it may be. And so when you said that, like, okay, you started to notice it, like you started to see it, like, give me an example for you, whatever you're comfortable sharing.
Yeah.
Right? Like where you've noticed, like what that's looked like for you.
Yeah. For me, it's like, so spending holidays, like growing up, not my whole childhood, but starting, you know, when my parents split, going this house, that house, this house, that house. I think it's challenging. We talked about that as a kid. It's a lot. You're kind of reliving that experience like over and over again.
Yeah.
And maybe you overcompensate by like trying to please everyone. I'm trying to please everyone, trying to do everything perfect. Like we talked about last time, the false self. Like, do people like me? Do they like me? Like trying to be a high achiever when it comes to pleasing people. So much that you end up hurting yourself.
Yeah.
Building resentment, building bitterness. All of those things.
Yeah.
And maybe you don't overcompensate in that way anymore. Maybe you find more balance, or you're willing to grow in those relationships, even if it means disappointing people, because honestly, that expectation was never healthy in the first place. So as I got older and I just focused more on my family and my life, a healthy balance started to occur. And now I'm no longer trying to perfectly please every single friend and family member because I now have a husband that I'm watering, a marriage I'm watering, a daughter I'm watering. But I think, when you overcompensate, you can kind of, that false self, start to put on that false self and achieve that really well.
Absolutely.
And then you're hurting your health, you're hurting yourself, you're stressing yourself.
Yeah.
And you're neglecting the people who need you and who you can have healthy relationships with.
Yeah.
As an example.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Plenty of examples.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, like these are all ways that we can overcompensate.
Yeah.
And the other thing that we talked about too, right? Like overcompensating can look like whatever I saw in my household, I knew it wasn't healthy, or I knew that it wasn't safe, whatever it may be. So much so to the point that my whole drive, my whole goal is to be the complete opposite.
Right.
Like that is what we call just overcompensating or overcorrecting.
Yeah.
Like it's just way too far to the opposite end. When I'm working with clients, for example, and I will, when it comes to couples, right? Like there's a thing that's happening in the relationship and maybe the partner is, doesn't ever ask for what they need.
Yeah.
So then they course correct and they go to the complete opposite. It's like, well, now I'm going to ask for what I need and I expect that it's going to be done.
Right. Might be a little too much overcorrection.
But also, and like this, it's like this swing back and forth. So also for those of us who, we talked about the whole pride thing.
Yeah.
Pride is a form of compensating for shame.
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
Like it's a complete swing to try to mask.
Right. Because you don't want to feel bad about yourself or something that happens. So
you do feel bad about who you are. So you try to cover it up with all of this pride or, whatever it is. Mm-hmm. And literally
most people won't even hear that.
Yeah. it could swing. And I think a part of that is also recognizing like when we understand that, when we understand what pride actually is.
Yeah.
It's a cover up, it's a mask for, it's a compensation for the shame and the ick of what that person actually feels about themselves. Mm-hmm. Then I think it also can give us some compassion with boundaries.
Right.
Right? Like to not course correct in the sense of like, I'm just going to love on them so much because they feel all this. No.
Right.
You can have compassion and then give some boundaries. But I think it's important for us to also talk about, okay, so where does all of this come from?
Right.
And so a lot of this stems in childhood. I will talk about that till, I'm blue in the face. Mm-hmm. Who you are is not necessarily like by chance, right? We are constantly in this living, breathing organism, right? Like we're constantly in action and reaction to somebody else.
Right.
Like that's how we're formed. That's how we're created. And so what we talked about is there's this thing called a genogram that can help you to understand a little bit more.
So cool.
About your family dynamics.
Yes.
It's pretty much like a family tree.
Yeah.
But with a lot more information. It's not just, well, who's the parent here and then who's the child? It's way more than that. It talks about like the patterns of relating between spouses, the patterns of relating between parent and child, the patterns of broken relationships. Ideally you want to go your generation, your parents' generation, and then the generation before that to really start to see the patterns. Mm-hmm. But it's pretty much a visual representation of your family tree and the relational dynamics that exist within that family tree.
It's so powerful to do. I tried to start mine. I was like, Tina, I want to do this with you. I tried to start mine, but what's cool about the exercise is like when you have, say you've achieved a lot and you've survived life, and you feel like you're isolated and you're on a mountain by yourself without realizing what you have survived, what you're a product of, what you've still been impacted by is so important to do. I thought it was neat. Yeah. I had never heard of it till you brought it up months ago. But yeah.
What did you, when you were doing it, like, was there anything that you started to see or like any patterns that you could notice?
The number one overarching thing first I did was, as an African American, how disconnected we are from, obviously from slavery. Our like parents, or not parents usually, but grandparents, greats. It's just so much.
Yeah.
It was so fractured. So our sense of family is already broken in that sense. And it's a lot that we're overcoming there. So that's the number one thing. Lots of that history.
Yeah. And a lot of fracture.
A lot of fracture. And then two, like blended families on the sides. And it's so funny that you start to realize patterns like that.
Ooh.
Yeah. So it's
the patterns of the blend of the what would you name? Like,
I would say the blend. I would say like the blended families. I'd say there's a pattern.
Yeah.
But with that lens of like what we came from, and even post slavery, you have migrations to different states. There's so much that my family was impacted by, with my great grandfather having to be here, or my grandfather having to move here, that I think also led to blended families. So it's like external circumstances that impacted us, but also internal ways of being. And me just putting that on paper and starting to realize that it's powerful for me.
It's eye-opening. Yeah. It's eye-opening. You start to see your family almost like from outside of it.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of times when we're in it, we're just like, well, this is just the norm. This is what I'm used to. There's nothing really that I need to understand, because I feel like I already know it because I lived it.
Yeah.
But the thing is, when you live something, we kind of lack the ability to zoom out and to see the whole picture because we're just in it.
Right.
And so a genogram does help with that. It helps to be able to zoom out and see the whole picture and start to say, oh, that's why I've experienced this, or that's why I do this. Like it did not start with you. That's another book.
It didn't start.
That's another book to start reading.
Yes.
It's called It Didn't Start With You.
Yeah.
And it really does help to start to see that your ways of relating, your ways of doing things is really a symptom or a result of your lived experience, your family dynamics, the generations before you. And I think it also just gives a whole lot of compassion.
I was just about to say that. How much compassion and grace that I have, even more so for my parents, and even more so for my grandparents and my greats, because they were also, it started before them, and it started before them. Yeah. So it's like I have grace and compassion for those who came before me, but just also so much intentionality about my future genogram going after me. So it is powerful.
So much intentionality.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
I will say I'm trying to think through mine. I've done mine a couple of times. My
Very
genogram.
Cool. Yeah.
Yikes. One of the things that I have seen in terms of like a pattern is just a whole lot of hurt and pain, or like I will use the term abuse. I'll use the term abuse to the women in my family over generations. But also it helps me to understand why in my family there's a very strong women presence and sense of independence and sense of women leadership, I think, in response to all of that.
Wow.
Because it's like, I'm not going to be put in that position where I am at the mercy of someone else again. So it's almost like that gets passed down generation over generation over generation.
Wow. Almost like it's
a correcting. Yeah. And because of a distrust, right? Because of there's been an abuse of power and things like that. And so seeing that dynamic over and over again was really fascinating. And so it just kind of, the other thing that I think is powerful when you're looking at genograms is that you can be struggling with what your grandparents were struggling with, and it just looks different.
Oh.
So, for example,
don't tell me.
I'll use this as an example where, actually, Mike Todd talks about it a lot, pastor, where grandparents maybe have struggled with multiple sexual partners.
Yeah.
Parent struggled with, back in the day, there was like, oh my gosh, what is it called? Flash shows or something like that, where it's
that
like,
is news to me.
Yeah.
What is
where like there's like a woman in a box and like this curtain opens and she's like doing this dance. And so peep shows.
Okay.
Peep shows.
Okay.
That's what it was called.
Yeah.
And so that his father would engage in that. And then he struggled with pornography, right? And how that looks different across generations, but it's all a similar symptom. And the symptom is some sort of sexual misconduct or sexual misconduct, right? As a form of coping.
Wow.
With some sort of void or with some sort of emotional experience or with some sort of, whatever.
Yeah.
And so I'm trying to think like other examples of like what that can look like. I'll have to think about it.
Yeah.
Man, I wish I had some more
That's
just kind of
really
like
good, though.
available.
That's true, though, because you might overlook, oh, I didn't do that. Or you might even compare and be like, well, it's not that bad.
Yes.
And I still realize that there's still underlying there. That's when it's so important to call that out. It's like, well, I'm not doing all that. I ain't out here. But you might still, like he said, he had that porn addiction. So it's like, no, you still got some roots causes there.
Thank you for saying that.
Yeah.
Because that's the whole point.
Yeah.
I'll use two different language. Christian language, your sin may look different,
Mm-hmm.
but doesn't mean that it doesn't have the same root.
Yeah.
Hey, real quick. Are you sick and tired of getting into the same fights with your partner over and over again? Are you sick of feeling misunderstood and disconnected? If so, I get it, which is why I created an ebook just for you. In Crushing Conflict, you're going to get a guide about how to get out of the chaos. You're going to learn why you keep getting stuck in the same cycle over and over again. You're going to learn how to get unstuck with several practical tools. And you're going to learn how you can create lasting change in your relationship. If that's you, I invite you to click the link in the description below and grab your copy today. I hope that blesses you.
Therapy language. Your form of coping may look different, but it doesn't mean that you're not coping for that same emotional root.
Yeah.
This is why knowing your emotional experience is so important.
Right.
Because what you're experiencing emotionally is inside. It could be a form of anger. It could be a form of despair. It could be a form of sadness. It could be a form of anxiety.
Yeah.
How you cope with that may look different, but if your parents struggle with anxiety and they never addressed it, you struggle with anxiety and you don't ever address it, they might have worked so much every single day.
Yeah.
And now you might be super controlling in your home.
Wow.
They controlled it by controlling the external world, and you're working on it by controlling the internal world. Still has the same root.
You know what's funny? Is like, I got to my part of the genogram, my family, I was like, I'm good. But this makes me want to go back and just make sure, like, okay, because
because we look at the behavior. Again, we do this all the time. And let's be honest, it's because it's the easiest thing to identify.
It's easy. Yeah, right. Easy to identify, even if there is some pride there where it's like, well, I'm not going to do that, but not realizing that you still, honey. So yeah, I need to go back to my genogram, make sure that that's good. That's good. I get how that could be a big oversight.
Yeah.
For sure.
Because, so this is how we understand the genogram.
Yeah.
And a genogram is going to show you patterns.
Yes.
So don't just look at the behaviors.
Right.
Look at the pattern that it's creating over time.
Right.
Okay, that's one thing.
Mm-hmm.
But also recognize that a lot of dysfunctional or unhealthy behaviors are forms of coping with some sort of internal emotional experience.
Right.
So what could that be, right? So I think you talked about just a lot of fracture, right? Being an African American, right? Like there is a lot of fracture. We know that in history, right? Like we know that there's so much brokenness because of the society that we've lived in and the things that have happened.
Yep.
So what does that cause in an individual?
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
How do I have to cope with the fact that my environment isn't safe?
Yes.
Right?
Yes, yes, yes.
And how I have to cope with my environment not being safe may look one way in one generation, but it can look a very different way in another generation.
Yeah.
But doesn't mean that the safety is now has changed.
It hasn't, yeah.
Right? Like,
right. That's huge.
That's what a genogram is going to show you.
Yeah.
It's going to show you patterns. But I also think it's important to like have some questions prepared, right? So you could do this with a therapist, or you could do this with maybe a coach who does this. I don't know. But also, like, if you want to have like some questions prepared, I think it's really helpful. I almost
would advise that as someone who did it by myself so far. I gave myself 5 stars, honey, and I think I probably need to go through this with someone. So I second that.
I love it. But this brings us to the overcorrecting.
Yes.
The overcompensating.
Yep. Like almost when you're not aware of those things.
Yes.
You can achieve at the false self. You can overcompensate in different ways. And I think that's why the genogram kind of helps to understand what your slow down, what your parents have experienced, how that's parents, how that's impacted you. Mm-hmm. And then in tandem with understanding your feelings, and like if you're not understanding your feelings or any of how you've been impacted, you're just kind of out here surviving. And a part of that survival could be overcompensating.
Right.
So that you don't feel those exact things, or you're avoiding those things. But yeah. I think that's why. Yeah. So I was interested in like, how do you do so in a healthy way? I think that starts to be healthy, is being aware.
Yes. I think step number 1 is awareness, right? Yeah. You can't truly change or heal from something that you don't know is broken.
Right.
Or you don't even know exists.
Right.
And so when it comes to this idea of overcompensating, a lot of times, again, this is just a very common thing. It's like we just do the opposite of what our parents did if we didn't like it.
Right.
But that's not going to be helpful long term, because what do you think your children are going to do?
Right.
The opposite of what you did because it wasn't helpful. Right. Unless we have an idea of the root.
Right.
Like that's the piece that we have to be able to address and come into. And I think being aware of it is one step, but then understanding it is the other.
Yeah.
I was aware that let's say like there's, come from a divorce household. I know that my parents got divorced and I didn't like that.
Yeah.
So I'm going to overcompensate, but I'm never going to get divorced.
Right. And maybe that makes you avoid conflict and growth totally. Because you're like, I'm going to just put up with this because we staying married. But then...
But it doesn't actually address the root.
It doesn't address the root. And then maybe you stay married, but your children are like, oh, but y'all don't look happy at all. Right. I ain't never seen y'all work through conflict healthily. Do y'all like each other? But y'all still married, though. So you don't want that.
Right.
And then your kids are like, well, I ain't getting married. Because they're like, they don't look happy. So that's a really good example of like, why you still have to address the root.
You still have to address the root. Like get to the core of it.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think.
So it's awareness, it's understanding.
Yes.
So it's awareness of your family, the roots, how you've been impacted. It's understanding.
Yes.
What that is.
Yep.
And then it seems like it gets to you, and then maybe understanding your feelings and like how,
Yeah. So I would say this is my ACE method. Okay. I got the ACE method to healing, to going through different challenges. A is awareness. C is comprehension, understanding. E is empowered action. We love to jump from maybe awareness to action. But if we don't understand what's happening, so if we don't understand our emotions that are driving our behaviors, if we don't understand the thoughts that are fueling all of that, then we're just going to be jumping into action, reaction all the time.
Right.
So we have to, one, slow down so that we can be aware.
And don't give yourself 5 stars on your Yes.
I think a part of that too, let me break down the awareness. Be aware of what you're doing well and be aware of what you need to grow in.
Nice.
Right? Like, that's a zoomed out posture.
Yeah.
I can look at the whole picture. If I only look at what's going right, that's limited.
Right.
If I only look at what's going wrong, that's also limited.
Right.
Like, I have to be able to zoom out and be able to see this whole picture.
Yep.
So that I have more empowerment truly to have choice.
Right.
If I don't zoom out, if I don't see majority of what's there,
right.
we're all going to have blind spots.
Mm-hmm.
So that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Thank God for relationships.
Yep.
They'll highlight those.
Yep.
But if I'm not able to zoom out, then it's going to be really hard for me to feel empowered and like I have choice, because I'm just going to be constantly reacting off of the limited information that I have.
Yep.
So that's where I would say, like, the awareness piece.
Okay.
Zoom out, touch on what's great, touch on what's not.
Yep.
From there, understand how all that works.
Yes. Okay. I'll reduce mine to 3 stars for now and
Yeah.
for further notice. No, I love that.
Yeah.
And then, so awareness, understanding, comprehension, what's all happened, truly understanding the pattern, how that's impacted you, how you're feeling, and how you've been reacting so far.
Yeah.
And then if you do now understand what needs to be changed, kind of like empowered action, you're saying.
Yeah. Because from there, then you can actually truly make a choice that is well-informed.
Yeah.
Yep. I think we can get into like so many different, for example, maybe I think of like emotion regulation.
Mm-hmm.
Let me see if I can like back it all the way up. Let's say I'm in my relationship, I shut down.
Mm-hmm.
But I have no idea why I'm doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Someone could tell you, well, don't shut down. Speak to your partner.
Yeah.
Say whatever. Like, how helpful is that?
Yeah. I don't know how to not do that.
Right. I don't even understand why I'm shutting down.
Yeah.
So being aware of the fact that, okay, I'm shutting down because I'm feeling overwhelmed.
Right.
Why am I feeling overwhelmed? Well, when this happens, like, these are all steps that we have to take. Well, when this happens, I start to, like, my body is I'm flooded.
Right.
I'm flooded with emotion. I don't know how to organize it. Like, it scares me. We could go all the way back to, well, where have you felt that before?
Right.
What's it look like in childhood?
Yep.
What happened when you were flooded with those emotions?
Yep.
What were the negative consequences, right?
Yep.
So again, this is all happening inside of you, but if we're not slowing down and being aware of it and understanding it, we're just constantly reacting to it the same way we always have.
Right.
So being aware, whatever. We also might be doing that because we saw our parents do that.
Yeah.
Well, I actually shut down because that's how my mother reacted to my dad.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how they navigated it.
Yep.
And it seemed to work fine for them.
Mm-hmm.
So why can't I just do that too?
Yeah.
All this is, it really is a slower process.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people don't like to hear that.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense when it's a new way of being, literally, that you're working on, that is not the same, that is different than what you have seen and experienced. It is a process because you're a human.
Yeah.
And trying to change and forge new patterns is not an easy undertaking. It's like a practice.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's like a practice. And
ooh.
You need encouragement. You need consistency. It's a practice.
It is.
Yeah.
I think I also just thought about the fact that, like, maybe sometimes we don't because this new practice, I've worked so hard at overcorrecting that maybe the thing that I have to practice is a little bit of what I saw that I didn't like.
Oh, the balance. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I can imagine one example is like, say you, this is not my story, but like say you grew up and you didn't like how discipline was handled in your house. And say it wasn't abuse, but you just didn't like how it was handled. And then you're like, well, I'm not going to discipline my kids. But,
That's
that could impact your child and like your children negatively if they're never kind of constructively structured in a structured way disciplined. So then it's like needing to understand that, discipline can be constructive and it could be helpful and beneficial to raising a child. But I feel like that's a good example of like, okay, if I've overcorrected to like not disciplining at all, maybe I need to incorporate some of those disciplinary practices for the betterment of my children and their development. But have a little bit of balance with, what I think is best. I think it's a balance.
Yeah, it is a balance. Think of it as this, what is that magnetic ball thing that goes back and forth? It pings back and forth. It's like being able to pendulum. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
That rather than kind of swinging back and forth, because like, well, I've seen what it looks like over here, so I'm just going to go all the way over here.
Yeah.
Of like learning to still move between both sides, but to keep that swing less
less volatile,
to learn how to live in this space of movement and not rigidity. That's
and that's relationship too.
It is relationship. Oh Lord, we could get into that. I'm trying to think, did we talk about everything?
I think we did. I think it's helpful, like as you're moving through maybe reminders that during this time that can be sensitive for some. As you're moving through the holidays and you're dealing with old friendships, old relationships, mostly family dynamics, specifically, like patterns you've seen there, how you can be aware of those things, aware of where you're overreacting, and then know where you can add some balance back to your life.
Oh, that's good. Take that with you, y'all.
Yeah.
Enjoy.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays. Bye.